Welcome to Social Work Live at the Columbia School of Social Work. I'm Michael Friedman, and I'm the host of this program each week. And I get to interview really interesting people from our community about what's going on in the world of social work. We're going to talk for about 15 minutes and then open up for your questions. There's some place on your Facebook screen or whatever it is that you're watching where you can put in questions and comments, so we hope that you'll do that. And today I'm happy to be talking with Tara Batista, who is recently appointed the director of a Revitalized Management Fellows program. It's great to meet you. And what is the Management Fellows program?
Good question. It actually existed in the past, and we're bringing it back. And it is a specialization within our Social Enterprise Administration method, which I call our SEA method. But basically, it is a program designed for people who are kind of like mid-level managers. They have some work experience, and they know they want to be executives in social purpose organizations. So any kind of organization that has some sort of public benefit, like a government agency or department, or an NGO, or a nonprofit.
And by NGO, maybe not everyone knows what NGO is.
Right. Okay. Thank you for stopping me. It's a non-governmental organization, and they tend to exist outside of the U.S. And these are people who want to work internationally.
And here we usually call them not-for-profit organizations.
Right. Right. Or they want to be executives in non-for-profit organizations. Some of them actually want to work in Fortune 500 companies in their corporate social responsibility departments or global philanthropy departments.
So that's really interesting.
Oh, okay.
Let me just stop you there.
All right.
So we've got social workers who are going to go work in Fortune 500 companies?
They're already there, actually.
They're already there, yeah.
Yeah, we have quite a few that have worked for big banks and or worked for like NBC Universal. We just had a panel on the 13th, and we had 4 alumna. One couldn't make it, but they all were actually in corporate social responsibility type jobs at
So that's
major
different
companies.
from the ones who are in employee assistance programs? This is a different kind of role in a big company?
Yes.
So what do they do?
These are for-profit companies. They're often banks, and they help the organization bring their philanthropy inside the organization. So part of that will be the employees want to volunteer with the community. Part of that will be that the company wants to give away tens of millions of dollars a year, and they want to know what areas should they give this money, and where are they going to make the most impact. And they like to pick areas that have something to do with their missions, but they don't know necessarily a whole lot about how to work with communities or vulnerable populations.
So they're like foundations in a way.
They have foundations often too, which are
As well.
separate.
I
Yes,
see.
and those are outside
Yeah.
the for-profit company. But corporate social responsibility, or they're starting to call their departments global philanthropy, are actually inside.
Interesting.
the
But I
company.
interrupted. You were explaining what people in the
Okay.
management leadership program are there for, and
Okay.
some are there to be in social purpose organizations, and some want to have important roles inside of Fortune 500 companies.
And some want to start their own companies.
Right.
So we're looking for people who have work experience and when they want to be senior in an established organization, whatever it may be, for-profit, non-profit, government. But then there's people who they don't necessarily have a ton of work experience. They're not necessarily mid-level managers, but they have an idea, they see a gap, and they want to fill a need, and they want to design a venture around that, and or they've already started.
Can you give an example?
Well, we have Becky Straw, who helped develop Charity Water, and that is one of the top 10, she's alumna, top 10 social enterprises in the world, on the same list with like Muhammad Yunus. We have current students like Elizabeth Detka, who was a returning Peace Corps volunteer, but when she was in the Peace Corps, she was approached by women in Zaza, Rwanda, who were HIV positive. They wanted to raise their incomes. They wanted her to help them start a bakery. So she did, and it's called Duter and Berry Bakery. And she was able to help the women double their incomes. And then she raised $15,000 to hire the Women's Bakery, which is a nonprofit consulting organization that helps scale up these types of women-owned bakeries around the world, to come in and try to help her make Duter and Berry more profitable. She actually took Columbia Business School consulting group called Pangea Advisors over to Zaza, Rwanda last year. She's a second-year student here.
It sounds amazing, and
I have hundreds of examples. If you want me to keep going, I can.
well, no, we'll maybe we should use some more as we go along.
Okay.
But it's very striking that this is I was going to say a young woman. Everybody is young to me, so, but this is a woman who saw a need that's rather enormous in the developing world, and that affects particularly women who often have no way to generate income and who often become, well, how should I put it, more reliant on men than they would like to be. And so this is the kind of thing that contributes both to the economic security of women in the developing world and to their personal security.
Right? Yeah, they're not as dependent.
So part of this program is, as I understand it, part of it sounds like the kind of thing that I would understand easily, because I've been an administrator much of my career and built up a number of new programs and all of that. So you've got people there who are learning how to be leaders in the not-for-profit community primarily, and some within the giving section of the for-profit community. But you also have people who are breaking new ground and trying to address major social problems.
Exactly. It's really exciting, and we really have an emphasis on being attracted to complexity and it's seemingly intransigent social problems.
And this is what you call social entrepreneurship?
Well, these complex social problems that are pressing exist, and all sorts of actors and organizations are trying to help. And I have no problem with anybody who wants to help. I think there's a huge role for government. I think a lot of social entrepreneurs will engage in public-private partnerships, leading with the public. And I think there's some great work occurring in nonprofits. I think sometimes it matters very little, like the difference between let's name a sector and put you in a category, and kind of this category is doing this and that category is doing that. But yeah, there is something called social entrepreneurship, right? And everybody's talking about it, and it seems to imply doing something new, and seems to imply business, and so we actually spend a lot of time in my class. I teach social entrepreneurship, trying to define what it is and what it means. And so we read a lot of authors, and we read their definitions and their attempts, and then we come together as a class and we define social entrepreneurship for ourselves. We have activities and we vote on a criteria, and then I use that criteria when they design their own social innovations.
So when we were talking before the show, before this interview about this, I was under the impression that social entrepreneurship meant the kind of thing that I've been familiar with over the 50 years I've been in this world. And that is that there are people out there who are entrepreneurial. They start inside organizations, or they start new organizations, and they build them up into major service providers or advocacy groups or a variety of things that they do. But this is a little bit different from that.
Well, it could be, and I think so. I tend to think that social entrepreneurship is a little different from that. You very well may build a program or an intervention inside an existing organization, and there's a term for that called intrapreneurship. And then people laugh. They say that term doesn't exist. That's not real. But you will read about it. And I think intrapreneurship is really hard, innovating within an existing organization. And I know you've done it. I'm doing it right now. It has its own set of challenges, right?
For sure.
Oh, yeah. You have to work with like existing organizational processes, and you have to understand why people resist change and things like that. And it's quite different from starting something from scratch. that you largely can define with the population that you're working with. And then there's, people who are exerting pressure on governments and corporations to change their practices. They don't work directly by providing goods and services directly to clients or consumers or marginalized people. They try to get institutions and other actors to behave differently to help these vulnerable people or marginalized communities that they perceive, hey guys, if you're a big corporation, you might be causing some of these problems.
So it's my perception that you, in running this program and teaching this course on social entrepreneurship, would like to see social workers really get engaged in some of the major social problems or major problems that we face. As you know, I'm an old man, I've got grandchildren, I'm afraid they're not going to make it through the end of this century.
Right. Me too. Yeah.
So there are, I don't know if you want to identify some of the problems that are getting away.
I think the obvious problem that you're probably talking about that's really urgent is climate change, right? Like we've got a 12-year window.
Right, so let's take climate change.
Okay.
We don't ordinarily think, or at least I don't ordinarily think, of social workers getting involved in trying to solve the problems of climate change. But you have a sense that there could be social entrepreneurs who come out of a social work background who could take that on, yes?
Yes, I have a student in my class right now, Brian, who is working on the UN Sustainable Development Goal of life underwater. He's got a
life underwater.
There's 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. That's one of them. Our oceans are in desperate need of repair, and they're an important component of the ecosystem. And if all the coral dies, and you can bring coral back, I think people don't know that, but then we've got a big problem in the food chain, and it affects everybody above the food chain, which we are. And so I really like the Enactus approach, which is it's a kind of social enterprise platform like Ashoka, which supports social entrepreneurs. Ashoka is started by Bill Drayton. He used to work for the EPA, second in command, and he supports social entrepreneurs globally.
I see.
And he has fellowships. He supports them with funding and with a network. And so there's a program that does that for college students, undergrads and graduate students, called Enactus. And they say to the students, you can help the environment, but the environment is not allowed to be your client. You have to explain to us how it affects people's livelihoods. So if all the fish die in the sea, well, then it affects fishermen's ability to feed their families.
So what is a social worker going to do?
Well,
you
I
were
mean, a
starting
social
to talk
worker
about
wants,
Brian, who
wants people to be able to feed their families. A lot of social problems come from economic problems. A lot of economic problems come from environmental problems. I think Syria was experiencing a drought, for example, and then people ended up starving, and so they became desperate, and a revolution occurred. So we're all interconnected, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. These problems are related, and we can't really ignore any area. But yeah, Brian has a scuba diving academy for veterans and some of them are paralyzed or paraplegic, and they can feel normal underwater. And the training academy will train them and a lot of other military veterans to repair coral reefs. So it's an academy. It's located in the Virgin Islands. It can charge tuition. It can charge fees, just like a university could, right? So there's a kind of a profit-generating mechanism that makes it a bit sustainable.
I'm wondering, I haven't asked you this before, I don't think, but let me ask this. Do you think that schools of social work at this point should be doing something with their curricula so that they're more focused on the problems that threaten the future of humanity?
Yes! Yeah. And that's what I teach my students. I really, I agree with certain authors who say that a lot of the simple problems have been solved, and what's left over are really complex problems. And they involve systems change, and they're interconnected, and we really need to understand context. And so I don't teach them any shortcuts, and I don't promise it will be easy. There are no guarantees. Failure is high.
But this is really a very powerful statement about the future of social work. Right? This is... Well,
it's in line with what social work already does, I think. I think social work is very macro, and it understands systems change and the need for adjusting structural problems that are causing the problems that individuals face. And they understand that like individuals are complex human beings embedded in complex systems. And so like, yes, you can provide therapy to individuals who are struggling to cope with a really bad macroeconomy. And we need to keep doing that. But at the same time, we need to fix an economy that's creating two tiers, even like two lifespans. You know, wealthier people are living longer, and then certain groups of people are living shorter lives and unhealthier lives, and they have the worst kinds of jobs, and they have no security, and their towns are depopulated, and you know, we know what's causing this, and we know how to fix it.
So this is really interesting to think about what the future of social work education should be, given the kind of world that we live in today, with climate change being one example. We do have a question, so let's take a look and see what it is. There is a cultural or ideological prohibition against social workers earning a lot of, is there? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A cultural ideological prohibition against social workers earning a lot of money.
Well, wasn't there a scandal in the late 90s, I don't know if anybody remembers this, about the head of the Red Cross making $900,000 a year, the executive director? My facts might be not perfect on that, but I think it was a public outcry, right?
There was a public outcry about the Red Cross, the leadership of the Red Cross. The former head of United Way, of America, or I think of America, actually went to jail because he was flying on the Concorde over to Paris back and forth, and various other things. So certainly there is some concern about people being overpaid and people who commit acts of fraud. There are a number of people in New York who've recently gone to jail who were acts of fraud. But you know, I'll tell you my view about this, which is social workers don't take a vow of poverty. And social workers, in fact, can make a very good living doing the ordinary things that social workers do. And I'll give you my favorite example of a social worker who's done very well for himself, a man by the name of Michael Dowling, who heads Northwell Health, which he built up from a merger of a hospital to now be the largest employer in the state of New York with 46,000 employees in his organization. And the last time I looked, he made $10 million a year. Nothing wrong with that. That's what people get paid in the healthcare industry. He did the work, and so I don't think social workers have to take a vow of poverty.
I wouldn't feel comfortable accepting $10 million, no matter what I had built. I would give most of that money away.
Well, I don't know whether he does that or not.
Right.
That's all I know is what shows in the reports about the level of executive compensation.
But I mean, to your point, sure. I think if you're helping people and there's demand for your product or service and it scales organically because there's so much demand, then you very well might start your own practice, private practice, for example, or that example.
Build a chain of private practices. Let people do that. Assisted living.
Indeed, they do it all the time, right?
Was in part started by social workers, if I remember the history accurately. So, social workers have done those things, but that's not what you're talking about. You're talking about people who focus on a social cause and do what needs to be done to address that.
They are, though. I mean, if you start a chain of mental health facilities, your social cause that you're focusing on is improving mental health. I would like to get to the point, and you know, you've scaled and you're sustainable. These are kind of criteria for social entrepreneurship. You started something new, so that's another criteria to be a social entrepreneur.
Could you define scaled? I know what it means, but
okay.
I'm not sure everybody listening does. What is scaled?
I just want to say, like, your example is ticking a lot of boxes, right, for being a social entrepreneur, or for some social entrepreneurship, entrepreneuring, right, with a social focus. But scale means that what works for a few hundred people in one geographic location can also work for tens of thousands or millions. And so it might look like there are a bunch of imitators who jump into the market and they start copying your model, and that's great. We love when you copy and imitators, because we don't have competitors in social entrepreneurship. We have cooperators. We want the problem to go away. So we're not fighting for market share, right? Like we're
So going to scale means spreading it out. You start one place.
You could have
but then it goes.
franchises. You
Right.
could have we want the solution to scale.
Question: how can we as social workers work at both micro and macro level?
I think your example is a great one of that. At the micro level, individuals are getting health services, right? At the macro level, you might combine that with advocacy, so that you might see, well, why do they need mental health services in the first place? What's causing the problem? And it could be that you use advocacy and activism to put pressure on governments to dismantle unjust systems, maybe prison reform, or maybe better jobs, raising a minimum wage, which may or may not be the answer. I'm just pulling that out as an example.
Right.
But basically, like, if you provide services directly and you're engaging in activism, what can end up happening is your enterprise can look like what social entrepreneurs do. Because you end up combining the activism with the direct service, and so you create a new normal.
So what I find, Tara, is that there are many social workers who work at the micro level. That is to say, they're doing direct work with individuals and families, and they say, I have to have a life too. I'm working full time. I want my personal life. How can I be an advocate at the macro level at the same time that I'm doing hard work at the micro level? And I have an answer for them, which I always give, which is you should identify what you're interested in, find an advocacy organization that does it, give them some money, do some work for them if you have time and they want you to do it, and once a year go on a lobby trip with them. So I would say that's a minimum of what every social worker should do.
Yes.
If you're working at the micro level, you can still make a big contribution. Social workers sometimes say, how can we make a contribution? We make so little money. Everybody can afford $50 a year. Don't go out to dinner once. That's my stance on this particular
I mean, you
thing.
can partner with a really effective advocacy organization, especially if your causes are related.
And we need people who run advocacy organizations, need people who work at the micro level to send out email, to speak
we need
out
direct
when,
practice.
and we need the direct practice.
Yeah, and social entrepreneurs definitely work directly with the populations that are affected. They're not indirect. But then they're also doing this complicated work of working with governments, putting pressure on governments and corporations, and partnering with stakeholders.
Another question. What are the political differences between licensed mental health counselors and social workers, and what advice might you give to someone considering one or the other?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
So listen, for those of us who are in the field of mental health, it's a very competitive field. And there are a number of different professions, and each of the professions compete to have some piece of the action that's only theirs. So psychiatrists fight to do medication and not to let anybody else do medication. And psychologists fight to do psychological testing and not let anybody else do that. And social workers have gotten into this political, I don't want to call it game, but into this political struggle in recent years by creating clinical licensing for social workers, and many social workers have gone on to say, and this new field of mental health counseling shouldn't get licensed in the way that we're licensed to do the things that we do and to get paid by insurance companies to do it. You can make your own judgment about what you think is ethically right for social workers to do in terms of trying to choke other people out of the profession.
That sounds territorial.
It is absolutely territorial. And it is the way that these fields work. They're highly competitive, and social work is a competitor. And some people might say social work shouldn't be a competitor. Other people say social worker should be competitive, should fight for higher pay for social workers, should. And one of the ways of getting higher pay, squeeze out the competition.
So remember what I said about 5 or 10 minutes ago about social entrepreneurship being about sustainable solutions, not sustainable competitive advantage. So in this emerging field called social entrepreneurship, whatever that means, there's a lot of different definitions, but that is one of the principles, is that you just want to see the problem solved forever. You want to see it go away. that you want to see a new normal, a new status quo that makes the old status quo obsolete. And you will take the best from each system to get there.
So this is a great challenge for the profession of social work, to put aside some of these competitive interests that they have in order to focus on a problem, try to get the problem solved. Lots of argument about that within our profession.
I mean, I think it's also totally aligned with our social work values, though. I view social work as a very macro field, but maybe I'm biased.
All I'm saying is that there's a lot of argument about this within the profession.
Yeah, argument that I didn't even know about.
How does MSW no, wrong question. All right.
Oh, that's all the questions we have. Okay.
That's all the questions we have so far. Well, get your questions in. We'll be happy to take them on. Anything, place you want to move in this conversation that we should talk about more?
Well, maybe the skills that social entrepreneurs need, or the personal characteristics.
Yeah, I mean, that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of the same skills that social workers need. I think they need to be open-minded. I think they need to be comfortable with ambiguity in ambiguous environments with high levels of uncertainty. They're often accused of being risk takers or attracted to risk, and actually it's quite the opposite. And I think that really shocks people.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, I would not say that they are sort of constitutionally inclined to be risk takers, but I would say they have to be willing to take risk.
Sure. And but they're attracted to the type of risk that involves opportunities that nobody else takes. Everybody else is neglecting, like government, the private sector, the nonprofits, and for good reason, probably, if everybody's neglecting that opportunity to solve that problem. And they'll take it on if what they need to solve the problem involves skill, not luck. And so if they have the skill, then they'll go out and refine it, and they'll go acquire the skills that they need if they need additional skills.
Right.
And when they're acquiring all these skills or refining their skills, they're actually doing that to reduce the risk of failure, because they want to solve the problem. So they're actually quite strategic, and the opposite of risk takers. It just looks, to the untrained eye, it looks like it's risk taking.
Okay. It does seem to me that people in our field, to vastly oversimplify, fall into two categories. There are people who really just want to do the work. They love the work. Mm-hmm. They love the contribution that they make. They love being therapists if that's what they do, or doing group organization if that's what they do. But they just want to do the work, and the leadership really comes from others. And then there are people in the field who want to be the leaders. And there are people who may have new ideas, or they may be people who just like being the boss, which is another dimension of it. And so with social entrepreneurship, we're really talking about people who want to be in leadership positions.
I hope not.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I don't want to attract people who want to start an organization so they can say that they're the leader of an organization, so they can say they're an executive director. I mean, we have about 1.8 million nonprofits, and that's including when the IRS uses the automatic arm to eliminate and pull the tax exemption from about 800,000 over 10 years. So as the IRS is pulling these nonprofits out, there's more being created constantly. So we have a ton of nonprofits already. And my hope is that they're all doing amazing work and basically operating themselves out of existence, right, so that they never need to exist again, because they're tackling important problems and they end up solving them.
That's a really interesting thing I'd love to talk about. We have a related question, so I want to go to the question and let's see what this is. It seems that the SEA program aims at cultivating leaders and executives. Then do we have a chance to keep in touch with individuals directly?
That's such a great question. I love that question, because I cannot imagine an executive without direct practice experience. Yeah.
You want to comment on that?
Sure. what I love about our program is the first year you have a direct practice placement, and so you are interfacing directly with clients in your field placement, and you are taking direct practice classes, and so you kind of have a interdisciplinary first year that's focused a little bit more on clinical than your second year, and then in your second year you start focusing in on management and leadership and entrepreneurship. In entrepreneurship, you're still interfacing with individuals directly, for sure. And maybe I haven't made that clear. I mean, these people are using human-centered design and evidence-based practice to develop solutions to problems with communities, not for them. So
much to talk about,
yeah.
Sarah. I'd love to pursue that. We have one last question that's been put up here. As someone who has worked at multiple nonprofits with an ethical mission, something that always bothered me is the lack of oversight.
Yeah.
The tendency is to become self-congratulatory, even if your programs aren't working. How do you avoid that?
Well, that's what attracted me to social entrepreneurship, because it's about sustainability of solutions and social impact. It's probably subject to the same problems, though, that the traditional nonprofit sector is subjected to. I mean, because some social enterprises actually are nonprofits, right? But I've noticed that nonprofits tend to count outputs, amount of funds raised, grants pulled in, amount of programs delivered, amount of butts and seats. There's a lot of counting, and you need to have outputs probably to have some outcomes. They're related, right? But they're not the same thing. And so increasingly funders have moved to demanding that nonprofits report outcomes. And then the sector is even pushed even further beyond outcomes to actual impact.
So a
It's
simple
changing.
answer to this, well, you're saying it's changing, which is very important, but there are also accountability procedures that can be put in place so that you actually measure what you're achieving, and then honestly face what the data show.
And that's what we learn in my class. I mean, this week is social impact measurement.
Yeah. Well, it's tough to do.
It's very
It's
hard.
tough to do the measurement, and it's tough to face the music.
Yeah.
And not dismiss the data, but you got to do that if you're going to be honestly working to achieve something.
I absolutely agree.
So this has been a really interesting conversation to me. I hope it has been to you. I hope it has been to our audience. I do want to ask you, if people are interested in joining the Management Fellows program, how do they do that?
Great question. They need to be an accepted student first, which letters have been going out, and then they will get a invitation, accepted students. And we're still working through that system, how we want to do that. Last year we sent invitations to all accepted students in the in-residence 2-year traditional program.
And if somebody's already a student here and they've heard this and they really are interested now, can they get into this?
The Management Fellows program starts right at the very beginning of your 2 years.
I see. So you really need to do it from the beginning.
Because it affects your field placement and the courses you take.
And taking your course on social entrepreneurship means you have to be in the program, or could somebody from outside?
You can take my social entrepreneurship course if you're not a management fellow, even if you're not SEA.
Good.
Social Enterprise Administration, you can absolutely take my course.
So if you're interested in this and it's too late to get in at the beginning, there's still an opportunity to take Tara's course, which sounds quite fascinating and very important. So again, I want to thank you for being here. Thank everyone for listening, and to mention that next week there will be a collaboration with Columbia's Just Societies Initiative, and I'll be interviewing 2 different people who want to talk about what's involved. As I recall, we're going to be talking about people who are coming out of prison and re-entering society, and it should be quite a fascinating discussion about that very important issue. So we hope that you'll be back next week at 12 noon on Tuesday. Thanks a lot.